So today on Sports Fall, it's the second part of my Doug Gilmour series talking about probably his best season in the NHL, 1993 campaign with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the 93 season for the Leafs will be forever linked to referee Kerry Fraser. We're not going to go too in depth right now. Leave that pain for later on for all the Leafs fans. Now, the had a very good season in 92-93. Probably more quality than some expect. They ended up third in the North Division and fourth in the Campbell with a very, very good record of 44-29-11, including 25 home wins. Four goals against, 47 in favor, 288 to 241, led by GM Cliff Fletcher and Coach Pat Burns, and of course the classic Wendell Clark as captain. They basically, to many, overachieved during the regular season. They started off in quite a little bit controversy. They picked up Dave Andreychuk, Darren Poop, the first rounder on February 2nd. It's for Grant Fuhr, and that really solidified the remainder of the season, gave them more depth. Fuhr basically wasn't working out to the level, and the rookie sensation or new sensation, Felix Potvin, came in. The season was very ironic because it set a franchise record for wins, and 21-year-old goalie Potvin hit his first full season, had a 25-15-7 record. And the goaltending was one of the best in NHL, allowing only 241 goals. Only Chicago was better that year. Defense was excellent as well with Elliott, Gill, Lefebvre, Jamie McCown, Mironov, and Bob Rouse. But Gilmour was the one that was the straw was stirring the drink. On the defensive side, it's probably the best they ever were. They allowed the fewest power play goals in the regular season, and Andreychuk was a big part of the offensive-defensive combination, as he had 25 goals and 13 assists for 38 points. Now, Gilmour's career year kind of made the Leafs, and the run towards the Stanley Cup basically was driven by the scoring vehicle of Doug Gilmour. He had a franchise record 127 points that season, including almost 100 assists, and ranked in 8th in NHL scoring. In the playoffs, he really came to another level. As the Leafs took on the powerhouse Detroit Red Wings, bet them, knocked off St. Louis. Both in a 7-game series, and the victory over Detroit was a backbreaker because a lot of people felt that the Red Wings might be ready for a cup run or even to get past Toronto, but they couldn't do it. Now in the playoffs, Gilmour finished with 34 points, only behind Wayne Gretzky, who else? And he was also the runner-up that year for the Hart Memorial Trophy. Now, the second round series against St. Louis really stands out because not only he's playing against his former team, but Gilmour would get the big goals when he needed. In the second sudden death overtime period of one of the key games, he did some dipsy doodle behind the net and eventually scored. The double overtime victory was just sent the fans into a frenzy and eventually led them to go on to win the series. The big thing was against the Kings. They were overachieving yet again, and he won on a Glenn Anderson goal in Game 5. And many fans, including Don Cherry, who's a big fan of Gilmour, even kissed him on national TV in a very positive way. It wasn't a bad kiss, because who wants to kiss a death from Don Cherry, but especially if you're Ron McLean. And a lot of people were hoping for Montreal Canadiens Toronto series because at the time Montreal was pretty well assured to take on the winner of LA Toronto in the final, and because they had defeated the Islanders. However, all hell broke loose in Game 6. Kerry Fraser, who I considered probably he was only smart as his hair on certain nights, claimed he didn't see a high stick on Gilmour in overtime of Game 6. He drew blood and usually would be assessed a 4-minute penalty, and Kerry Fraser's non-call was a non-call heard around the world. Toronto Maple Leaf fans will go to their grave saying that Kerry Fraser and the NHL were favoring Wayne Gretzky. He didn't want to see Toronto against Montreal in the final because an all-Canadian final would be bad for the U.S. promotion of the NHL. I saw the game live. I wasn't there, obviously, but I saw the game live. Gilmour was clipped. Gretzky should have got a penalty. Of course, Gretzky scored in overtime, and all hell broke loose in the media. I remember working for the Dalhousie News at the time and seeing some of my coworkers basically smash down their coffee cups in disgust every time I brought it up at the office. Normal people off the street didn't know who Kerry Fraser was, and the next day everybody was looking for Kerry Fraser. Now, they had a chance to win it again in Game 7, but unfortunately Gretzky got a hat trick to make it 5-3. Maple Leafs scored one late, but that was it. That was all. Gilmour's season basically made the Maple Leafs stronger, more important to everybody, and rekindled thoughts of the old Maple Leaf franchise. Now, Gilmour, 127 points. Every point he got that season was very, very important. There was no way that anybody could say that Gilmour wasn't the player that everybody thought he was going to be. With Toronto, he came into his own. He became a level of player that we always thought he would be. Now, we often say what would have happened if Toronto would have come to the Cup that year. I know for a fact that Montreal would have been hard pressed to beat Toronto in the final. I think Toronto player for player were pretty well even with Montreal. But once you get the momentum of anything, it's pretty hard to stop it. Now, from '93 on, Gilmour basically continued to be strong play with Montreal. They eventually named him captain in 1994, when, of all things, Wendell Clark was traded to Quebec Nordiques for Matt Sundin, of all players. And with the Leafs struggling once again, unfortunately, Toronto made a bad decision yet again. Cliff Fletcher, who helped bring Gilmour in, traded him, and Dave Ellett to the Devils for a bunch of players that never panned out at all for either team, anyway. And Gilmour eventually went from team to team for a few years. Ended up in Chicago, Buffalo. Actually played with the Montreal Canadiens for a couple of seasons. Helped stabilize the franchise and get him back in the playoffs. And he had one last career game with Toronto in 2003. But at the time, like I said, the ship had sailed on Gilmour. His points totals decreased every year after leaving Toronto. And let me tell you, it's something that Toronto Maple Leaf fans always will look back on. Could they have defeated Montreal? If they would have defeated Gretzky, could have been 2 or 3 straight cups. Hard to tell because the mid-90s in the NHL, there was a lot of strength. Pittsburgh was still a factor. There was a lot of young players coming in, but Gilmour will go down as probably one of the most important, key components to the Toronto Maple Leafs of the modern era. He's the link to Darryl Sittler, Lanny McDonald, back to the era of Normie Ullman, Dave Keelan. He had some legal problems. He had some, public relations problems, but you can't stop on that. People make mistakes, and when it comes down to it, he made everybody in the league he played against better because he had to keep up with him. And he made Toronto better. He made NHL better. But all I can say is that any child that wants to learn about the Maple Leafs, let's say they're a young Maple Leaf fan under the age of 10, read about the career of Gilmour, and you got to bring the pride back. You see Austin Matthews, right? You see all these young players in Toronto. If they could play with the pride that Doug Gilmour had in the Leaf jersey, they can. And I think Austin Matthews can be, the next Doug Gilmour for Toronto. He's that good, and he has that much talent. Gilmour took a while for his talent to develop, just like Mark Messier, just like Owen Nolan, just like the way Guy Lafleur. And when he did, my God, he blossomed. So again, on this January post rainstorm day. We wish everybody a great weekend. And as we like to say in the old Maple Leaf Gardens, good to keep your stick on the ice. Have a good one. Bye.